Dr. Thorsten Arnold holds degrees in Earth System Science, Agricultural Economics, and Watershed Management. His PhD quantified equity impacts from climate change in an agricultural community. He co-authored the Drinking Water Source Protection Assessment Report for Grey Sauble Saugeen region and consults on managing numerical assessment models within public agencies. As owners of Persephone Market Garden, Thorsten and his wife envision agriculture that feeds people and simultaneously builds climate resilience in rural communities. Thorsten consults on developing resilient food chains, is a professional educator for holistic management, and educates on regenerative agriculture.
Thank you, Laura, for inviting me to this meeting. The title of my talk will be How Can Food Systems Build Resilient Landscapes? Just quickly about myself, I am basically a self-employed advocate for climate resilient societies. My background is in Earth System Sciences. I studied marine environmental sciences in University of Oldenburg, Germany, and then later pursued a PhD in adaptive watershed management, where I looked at agricultural economics of water use, especially for irrigation. My current interests are very much related to regenerative agriculture and the salt sponge and watershed functions, the small water cycle and biospheres, climate self-regulation. And I've been working also extensively around collaborative food marketing, building food hubs in support of regenerative farms, and lately became a professional educator for the Savor Institute in holistic management. That's basically a method to manage complex systems. I have a more professional standing in numerical modeling and model management in public sector institutions and agencies. So yeah, you can read about me at my website. Today I have very little time, so I'll mostly give you a very quick run through, give you some definitions of resilience, resilient landscape. I elaborate how landscape resilience is changing in our region. And then I talk about how food systems can support the resurgence of a resilient landscape in our region. Of course, there are barriers, and it's important to address these through our political action. I think the most accepted definition of resilience is by the Resilience Alliance, the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change so as to still retain essentially the same function, structure, identity, and feedbacks. It's kind of a mouthful, but what they're talking about is that systems have an inert quality of how they react to threats and to external stress factors, and they either collapse or and don't reorganize in a meaningful manner, or if they're resilient, they basically just merge and continue to operate even though they've been disturbed. A simpler definition that I like is that resilience is long-sighted efficiency that also takes into account the occurrence of crisis, whereas a standard efficiency concept is really just about short-sighted efficiency under current and constant conditions. So as soon as conditions change, then this short-sighted efficiency often doesn't work anymore. And the COVID crisis is a good example. It highlights where our society is standard efficient and other systems are resilient because they actually thrive in this crisis moment. And it's not either or. I think resilience and or short-sighted efficiency always are a balance, and any system always moves between those two states. We just need to make sure that we don't get lost and focus only on short-sighted efficiency. In order to manage resilience, Miguel and Clara Nichols have defined some measures as a first step. And they basically say we have climate threats, we have the vulnerability of a system, we have the reactive capacity of a system, and together these three elements define how the system will incur damages and what's the risk of these damages. Threats are described as a likelihood, as a probability with frequency, intensity, and duration. Vulnerability is described, for example, through the landscape, the vegetation diversity, soil organic matter, soil cover, slope exposure, etc. And reactive capacity, these two authors have described very much from the perspective of a farm. So they say it's farmers' knowledge, management skills, access to resources, the diversity of enterprises that the farm is engaged in. I think this definition also works at other skills. Then it wouldn't be the farmer's knowledge, but the community's knowledge. And the two have then combined these four factors in a simple formula. Risk is the threat level times the ratio of vulnerability and response capacity. And this ratio basically defines the resilience toward a specific threat. We can be resilient to one threat and less resilient to another threat. Even though the COVID situation also has shown that some systems seem to be resilient in many dimensions, and other systems have no resiliency in any dimension. And that's something which I find really interesting, but I think more research needs to be done how transferable resilience is. A landscape resilient landscape is a landscape that is resilient towards flooding and drought, wind and water erosion, water contamination, extreme past pressures, invasive species, and it also doesn't have much of a rural heat island effect with associated winds. Rural heat island is basically if you turn a forest into something very sandy, which is a bit like asphalt. Many people know this urban heat island effect where concrete heats up in the day and then doesn't maintain much of the moisture overnight. So in a rural heat island, you have hot days and cold nights, whereas a forest is much more mellow in its temperature changes. And that has implications for wind because you have these big uprisings, and that impacts how wind brings new water into an area. We look at the risks or the potential damages of a landscape resilience in terms of less loss of agricultural harvest, the collapse of water storage, especially in dry areas where we depend on irrigation, the collapse of biodiversity, which many people also call desertification. That's what desertification is. The biosphere disappears. Destruction of human infrastructure, roads, bridges, basements, and also the socio-economic, cultural, spiritual crisis. I like this bigger word because what we have learned also during COVID is how important it is that we have access to forests because it is spiritual renewal, just walking through this forest, not in a esoterical way, but simply it makes us feel better. In a way, it also makes us feel smaller, and we realize our connection to the living world around us. And that's, I think, where the core of spiritual happiness comes from. For each of these climate threats, we can think about what makes a landscape resilient. for flooding and drought, it's good retention and slow release of rainfall and also meltwater. Wind and water erosion, well, ground cover and high levels of soil health that hold the soil. Mycorrhiza and fungal properties are very important here. Water contamination, the low use of agrochemicals and a minimum of washout. These two combined are preventing water contamination from agrochemicals or nutrients. Extreme past pressure and invasive, the best barrier or the best resiliency we have in a biodiverse landscape with high levels of also landscape diversity. Some areas are forests, some areas are pastures, lots of edges. Life happens along the edges and diversity happens along edges. And in order to protect us from rural heat islands, we need permanent ground cover with transpirational cooling. One large tree cools the ground 24/7, like 10 air conditioning units of regular household size. So if we take down one tree, one big tree, that creates significant warming on the ground just because we stop this transpiration from the tree. And now if we look at these resilient landscape properties, there's actually three aspects that stand out. One is soil health. The second is the slow drainage of a landscape. Slow drainage means landscape like beavers had built it for hundreds of thousands of years with lots of ponding and water infiltration, wetlands. And the third one is biodiversity. We need biodiversity to have resilient landscapes. How does our region do with respect to landscape resilience? So what I thought is, what type of land uses actually offer healthy soils and slow drainage and biodiversity? And that's mostly perennial vegetation, for example, forests and pastures. It's wetlands and ponds, and it is habitat of all kinds for different types of animals and plants. And since we live in a rural area and most land outside of the urban few dwellings here is actually agricultural, I looked at land uses on agricultural areas. How did agricultural areas change within the 10 years of 2006 and 2016? Mind you, I believe that the last 4 or 5 years have been dramatically accelerating land use, especially in Grey Bruce, and the change of land prices is probably a good indicator for that. So on one dimension, I look at how much resilient land uses remain, and that's forest and perennial pastures, and how fast are we losing habitat and forest land and perennial pastures, wetlands. You could also say how quickly is the non-resilient land uses increasing, and that's mostly lawns and annual cropland with much lower soil health on average than in the other. And so I plotted that for all the counties in Ontario. I basically looked at the percentage on the x-axis, the percentage of land uses with a high resiliency value, and on the y-axis, the speed of change. Now, the bottom one is a relative number, whereas the y-axis is an absolute number. And yeah, if you look at all the different regions, then you can see that Southern Ontario has only a very, very low percentage of resilient land uses left. The speed of change is still there, but the small, I mean, it's kind of logical. If there's nothing there, you cannot convert that much anymore. Northern Ontario, on the other extreme, and also Central Ontario, has fairly low percentages of low resilient land use, or you could say we have high percentages of forests, wetland, pastures, hayfields. And that's good for land use resilience. The rate of change in Northern Ontario and Central Ontario is comparatively low. What's interesting is Western Ontario. Western Ontario is in the middle, together with a few areas in Eastern Ontario and a few even in Central Ontario. And there's 3 bullet dots in the, like little squares in the top that stick out. And that's those counties which have like an intermediate level of resilience left, but which change with dramatic speed. And those happen to be Simcoe, Bruce, and on top of all, Grey County. So I've heard quite often that Grey County officials say, we are very resilient. Compared to Southern and Western Ontario, yes, we are. But we're also losing it faster than any other county. And I think it is important to notice that sustainability means that we maintain this resiliency. And the reality is we are not sustainable because we are losing our resilience, our landscape resilience. We're actually a provincial hotspot for growth of low resilient land uses, annual cropland and lawns. And that comes along with the loss of landscape water retention. The soil water retention is reducing, and also land drainage is increasing. And you can see that if you drive around everywhere, how much drainage has gone in the last years. That means water comes faster down the rivers and creates more rapid flooding. But on the other side, it also means once this water is gone, much less is left for the vegetation to cool us. And so farmers will be dealing with flooding and drought. And that's not only because of climate change, but it's also the impacts of how we manage our landscapes. For example. And ultimately, I also would like to add the socioeconomic, cultural, spiritual crisis. If our landscapes are not resilient, the loss of a sense of home and just this sense of, it's not as fun to be on a parking lot than it is to walk through a forest. That's a spiritual thing that's not religious, not hokey pokey. It's just something that everybody deeply feels, and that's also part of how landscape resilience can impact us. So when looking at those different threats, then we can also look at what would make a resilient landscape. And so in a situation of flooding and drought, good retention and slow release of rainfall really can mitigate flooding and also drought, because once the water is gone and it's just drained into the river system and there's no water left, and then you're stuck with dry conditions. Wind and water erosion. Well, a resilient landscape has ground cover and high levels of soil health with lots of microbes and fungi growing in the soil. Water contamination, the low use of agrochemicals and minimum of washout due to erosion creates resilient landscapes. Extreme pest pressure and invasives. The way to build landscape resiliency is through biodiversity and high level of landscape diversity. Lots of different pockets, wetlands, forests, open area, closed area. Rural heat island and associated winds, also ground cover with transpiration cooling creates resilience. And so when we talk about landscape resilience, we can kind of boil it down to soil health, slow drainage in a system, and high biodiversity. So that's what we're talking about when talking of landscape resilience. How is our region of Grey County doing with respect to landscape resilience? The first question is, what type of land uses actually offer healthy soils, slow drainage, and biodiversity? And the answer is, it's mostly perennial vegetation, for example, forest and permanent pastures. It's wetlands and ponds, basically the beaver landscape. And it's the diversity and abundance of habitat. So if we talk about landscape resilience in our area, then we can ask, how do these three land covers change? And what I did is I used the agricultural census data and compared 2006 and 2016, which is now 4 years old, to look at land use change in our region. How much resilient land uses still remain today, and how fast are we losing these? It's kind of interesting. I did this for all the counties in Ontario. I calculated on the x-axis the percentage of land use with high resiliency value as percentage of the county. And on the y-axis, I looked at how fast are we turning into our landscape into annual land uses. That's basically cropland, which has very low resiliency, low diversity, and low water retention, and lawns and annual croplands. And you can see that all counties are different, but it's clusters by region. We can say that Southern Ontario is down in the left bottom. We almost have no more highly resilient land uses left. And the speed of change is fairly slow, but there's also nothing to be converted anymore. Whereas Northern Ontario has fairly high percentages of high resiliency and still fairly low conversion rates. And then there's those three big boxes in the bottom. Those are in Western Ontario. And those are the counties of Grey, Bruce, and Simcoe, with Grey leading in two things. Grey has, within Western Ontario, still the highest percentage of highly resilient land uses. That's great. But at the same time, no county in entire Ontario is losing resilient land uses as fast as Grey County. And so when somebody tells me, well, yeah, Grey County is still resilient because we still have so much compared to, for example, Essex County, which is down in the nothing is left corner, I would also say, well, yes, but we are losing it. And we are losing it faster than any other area in Ontario. This is actually a pretty strong and big risk to our region's resilience. We can't just continue losing it and expect to maintain this resiliency. So yes, we are provincial hotspots for the growth of low resilient land uses, annual croplands and lawns. This means also that we lose landscape water retention due to an increase of land drainage and the loss of soil water retention capacity through soil degradation. And this is increasing costs from road erosion, flooding, and drought tremendously for municipalities and households. This has nothing to do with climate change. Climate change is on top of that. We are not only losing resiliency, but we are also increasing our threat level. How would a food system build landscape resilience? Well, it would restore the ecological value, the hydrological water retention, and it would also provide socioeconomic, cultural, spiritual value in a landscape. With the latter, I mean the diversity of meaningful jobs that the land is giving to us, farm profitability, the number of jobs per acre in agriculture, secondary jobs in farm services that support people who make a living of the land. And I'll just quickly give you two examples. This is a picture of our farm. This is Persephone Market Garden. You can see a cleared area of about, it's about 12 acres all in all. Half of it is, it's actually a bit less, let's say 10 acres. Half of it is just hayfield on the left, and on the right side you can see our gardens. They're just blocks in rows. This is a few years old. Now it looks different, but the basic picture is still the same. And what you can immediately see is this farm provides a lot of habitat for biodiversity, both in maintaining windrows, but there's also just a lot of space for woodland. What we do is we provide continuous ground cover because we are no-till organic vegetable production. Our farm has very slow drainage. We had a 5 to 6 inch rainfall event this August, which eroded quite a bit on our municipal road and also on our lane, but we didn't have a single puddle on our field. Many other farms had fairly severe erosion and puddling. On our field with good soil health, you don't have that problem. All the soil just gets sucked up by the soil sponge and it's sustained. On 1 acre production, we create 3 summertime jobs on 1 acre. And one of these jobs is an intern, and there's an additional job in just back-end support, and we also have contract a few people. So there's more secondary jobs in our from our farm. And my wife hopes that within the 1.5 acres next year, she may be able to hit $100,000 in revenue without any other permanent structures on the field. And that's much more than most large-scale farmers make on even on 100 acres. And that's that just shows, okay, you can do small-scale production very intensively with a lot of human knowledge and still make it profitable and still create meaning and employment. The second example, which most people know me for, is this Eat Local Great Brews Farmers Cooperative, or it's actually a farmers and consumers cooperative, but currently farmers take the lead. And it's a system that creates markets for small-scale farmers that foster landscape resilience. It provides access to markets through aggregation, distribution, and joint marketing, and also an online sales platform. The co-op is controlled by farmers who can set their own prices and who can decide which other farmers are allowed to access this platform. And it's a platform that's designed also for educating and involving consumers or eaters into the decision process. So there are local examples how we can foster landscape resilience. Mind you, the current scale of Eat Local Great Brews and other resilient or let's say regenerative agricultural practices in Great Brews is still fairly small. So it probably, from rough estimates, probably less than 5% of consumer households spend a significant portion of their money on regenerative farming, and less than 5% of farm businesses would really qualify under regenerating soils and landscapes. Ultimately, the amount of the land base is even less because most of those farms are actually small farms with a fairly small land base. So currently our food system is really just scratching the surface, and it's showing that it's possible, but it's not yet creating landscape impacts. Last slide. What are barriers for growing food systems that foster landscape resilience? I think there are two barriers, or two classes of barriers. One is awareness around building landscape resilience. Most governments, agencies, councils, they still think very much about short-term efficiency of land use. So how much money does it make next year? How many developers will we be able to employ through winter, rather than thinking, what will this mean in 10 or 20 years? Will we leave land for our children? Or will we basically just create an eroded soil landscape? Issues around awareness would include soil health, the drainage. Are we keeping the water on the landscape, or are we losing the water as fast as possible into the lakes? How much biodiversity are we sustaining, or are we actually building, increasing the habitat of biodiversity? Costa Rica did that. They had only 25% forest left, and now they are back up to 50%. They said we have to increase habitat. That's the only way to protect us in this changing world. And while we've talked about socioeconomic, cultural, spiritual contributions, but especially during COVID, I think people are increasingly aware how healthy it is to hike a forest compared to walking through cornfields. The second type of barriers are around access by farmers to, first and foremost, knowledge and learning materials around agroecological practices. This is not being taught in universities around here. It's not being taught in our colleges. It's something that mostly lives farmer to farmer, and on the internet. There's much more structure behind this knowledge management in many Latin American countries. For example, Cuba has revamped the entire system around ecological growing, and they've actually done really well with it. We don't have this. We have some beginnings. The Gray Axe services is definitely the right direction, but there could be much more if we really want to build landscape resilience. The second one is we need to give farmers access to enabling markets that promote and pay a premium for regenerative practices that build landscape resilience. We also need to give them processing and distribution facilities. Right now, one of the biggest problems if you do regenerative grazing, for example, to recreate diversity and pasture lands and savanna landscapes, is that we don't have abattoirs anymore. And without abattoirs, the most beautifully pastured animal will not pay the farmer for doing it. So the farmers are losing money. And right now, we still don't have a distribution system to ship to Toronto. Local Grey Bruce is really just a start to better deliver here in this area, but we have to also think about scaling up and going towards the large urban centers. We produce just way too much for just our area. And finally, affordable land is a huge barrier so that farmers can actually farm regeneratively. A lot of farmers are currently close to retirement, and in order to retire, what people are doing is they try to maximize the short-term value of land. And the best way to do that is prepare it for an institutional buyer, an investment fund that wants to buy up land. And so what those institutional buyers want is farms without trees, without wetlands, without anything but corn or black soil. And this is what we can see in our landscape right now. New farmers cannot afford that type of land because they don't have the capital that institutional buyers have. So yes, thank you for your time and attention. And on we go to medicine.
And Madison, I'll just give you a quick introduction. Madison McGuire is currently the National Agency Relations Manager for the foodrescue.ca platform at Second Harvest, where she's responsible for establishing and expanding relationships with nonprofit organizations across Canada. She's a graduate of the Masters of Environmental Studies program at York University, where she focused her research on a food waste reduction strategy. Today, she'll be speaking to us about food recovery, food waste production, and the implications of COVID-19 on the food supply chain. Welcome, Madison.
Great, thanks so much, Laura. I'm just going to share my screen here to share my presentation. Okay, perfect. Just let me know if you can't see or hear me at all, but otherwise I'll get started. So thanks so much for having me. I work at, as Laura mentioned, Second Harvest on our online platform called foodrescue.ca, which I will touch a bit on today. So I just wanted to go through, a bit about who Second Harvest is in case anyone is not aware of us as an organization. Go through a few of the impacts that we and other charitable organizations have faced in the food system overall due to COVID-19. Then just a brief run through of how our online platform works. And then finally, some, ways that you can get involved with the platform, but also just thinking about food waste in general as individuals. Of course, a lot of the change has to come on a system level, but there are a few things that are a great area to think about as an individual. So as I mentioned, I work at Second Harvest, and we are Canada's largest food recovery organization. So we've actually been around since 1985, and we kind of operate a few different programs, one of them being what we call offline delivery. So in the GTA area, we do have a fleet of trucks that pick up food, surplus food, mainly perishables, so fruits and vegetables, protein and dairy, from a lot of distribution centers, greenhouses, larger operations, and then we deliver that to over 250 agencies in the GTA area, so shelters, newcomer residences, after school programs. And then we also operate training and education programs, a culinary training kitchen program, and then our foodrescue.ca platform, which I will touch on as well. And we kind of have a dual mission that is environmental protection and then also facilitating greater access to healthy, affordable food. I would say the environmental protection piece is something we focused a lot more on in the last few years, just in light of course, everything that's going on and everyone is discussing today at this conference. I just wanted to first touch on our research piece that we completed, I guess it would be 2 years now. It's called The Avoidable Crisis of Food Waste. And if you're interested in looking at this, either the roadmap, which is the shorter version, or the technical report, which is quite ambitious at 100 pages or something, I think, it is free on our website. If you go to secondharvest.ca under research, you can have a look at it, download it. And this is something that we did with a consulting company called Value Chain Management that focuses on supply chain analysis. And we did this because we really wanted to know what is happening in Canada when it comes to food waste. So a lot of the times we're looking at other countries, especially the UK and US, and what they have done around food waste. But, we're interested in what is happening here in Canada, where is it happening and why. So we produced this report. And our findings were that 58% of the food produced here in Canada is lost or wasted. And the number that we were most interested in as an organization is actually that 32%, because in the 58% does include, some things that are what we would call unavoidable, so natural shrinkage or bones or things like that. But then 32% of this amount could be rescued or what we call avoidable. So that would be like if you're at the grocery store and the grocery store has to throw out a bunch of product that isn't sold, or you at your house, have to throw things out. That's what we call avoidable. This study focused on just research from the farm all the way until it's being sold. So we weren't looking at the household, we were looking at what's going on in the supply chain and looking at where is that breakdown happening. And in this report, we also touch on, what are some of the things that can be done. I would say the number one thing that came out of this research is that so much more measurement needs to be done. So surprisingly, there are so many different food businesses, whether it's, a grocery store or a manufacturer or processor, who don't necessarily measure the amount of food waste that they have specifically. And it's really difficult to come up with how you're going to reduce your food waste, or how are you going to increase the amount that you're donating to a food rescue organization if you don't even know the actual amount. And of course, depending on the operation and where you are in Ontario or anywhere else in Canada, you may not have composting available. So this could literally be just going to the landfill. And of course, one of our main concerns around food waste specifically is just all the associated costs that come with that. So of course, there's the water and labor and transportation that you need to, grow the food, transport it, and then eventually, get it to the grocery store where we're buying it. And, whenever that food's wasted, you're losing all of those associated resources. And of course, food to landfill creates methane gas, which is a leading cause of climate change. So very much a key solution to tackling climate change is tackling food waste. So I just want to touch briefly on our response to COVID-19. So in our fiscal year, which goes from September to August, so it doesn't follow the calendar year, we rescued and just redistributed 23 million pounds of food. So this is by far the most we've ever done. And this includes, our offline operation, and then also through our online platform, foodrescue.ca. And a big part of the reason for this, huge spike is because of the pandemic. And I just want to use this graph to kind of show the big jumps that happened in April and May specifically. And that's because when the pandemic hit, so many businesses had to close. And so in particular, there was a lot of food that was supposed to go to the food service sector. So whether it's restaurants, cafeterias, places like that. And of course, those distributors that are the ones that typically, make those big bulk deliveries, they had nowhere for that product to go. So we did have an influx of food that was available across the country. And this posed some challenges because the product was normally in bulk because it was meant to go to the food service sector. So that's really difficult for a smaller charity or nonprofit to handle. So example, a massive tub of sour cream is not exactly the most accessible item to be getting. And then as well, a lot of that product was produce in those specific beginning months. And that's obviously the most perishable. There's not as many opportunities to freeze that product as there would be, say, if it was protein. And as well, our agencies that we, connect with on the platform or who deliver to, they even before the pandemic had limited storage space, especially freezer. So it means that they can't accept a ton of food all at once. They need to have it more spaced out, which provides another challenge at this time. So we had a few ways that we, addressed some of these issues that are coming about as the pandemic hit. So we were one of the organizations picked to grant out to other charities and nonprofits across the country, as well as we did a gift card program as well. So this was, either granting monetary funds or these gift cards as an immediate sort of relief, not at all a long-term solution, but immediate relief to the pandemic so that agencies could purchase things like PPE and takeout containers, which are these rising costs that they needed because they had to switch all of their programming. You can't be in person, you need to have everything be takeout, as well as, any infrastructure funds. Maybe you need to purchase another fridge or freezer to try to be able to expand your program because so many charities and nonprofits that offer a meal program saw a huge influx of people attending their programs if they were able to stay open, especially because many others had actually closed at that time. And as well, just to purchase food for that increased need is also something. So this is, just a map of where these funds and gift cards went, which was sort of all across the country. And we also created a food rescue task force. So this was to try to bring together the food business side of the supply chain and then the charitable side of charities and nonprofits that are offering meal programs to try to, come together starting at the beginning of the pandemic to meet at the beginning, weekly to try to figure out these surpluses of product that were available and, how can we share resources amongst each other to try to make sure that food doesn't go to waste, but also that, when it's perfectly, good proteins or dairy or produce, that we're able to get that to somebody that can use it. And then what I'm more involved in our organization, we had a much slower rollout for our online platform, which had started about 2.5 years ago, just in Toronto in certain pilot areas. And then now, with everything that happened with the pandemic, we actually ended up accelerating our national expansion of the platform, because there were so many businesses that wanted to post this food that they had, and then there was also so many more charities and nonprofits that were looking for food to access at that time. So that was sort of another, result of us having to kind of react to what happened with the pandemic. And during, this time of pretty much like March until ongoing now, obviously, still, we had a huge influx of signups on our platform from nonprofits, and we were donating in 9 provinces now, totaling over £1 million. And our platform is available both as a web-based, so you would create an account there and log in, or you can use that same login now to have it as an app on Android or Apple, which is more accessible. And finally, we are participating right now, so I apologize I don't have more fancy graphics or results for this one, but it's a new program called the Surplus Food Purchasing Program that the federal government announced at the end of August, and it is to link the charitable sector with suppliers that had excess product. So there's quite a few suppliers who had all this product that they would have normally sold to mainly the food service sector, or other businesses that just aren't able to take what they were able to before because of the pandemic. So we're given a list of suppliers, we were given funding, and we purchased mainly frozen protein because it's easier to move in that you can keep it in a cold storage and then slowly take it out as needed. And then we took orders from our charities and nonprofits registered on the platform, and then we were responsible for sorting out how to get those orders to everyone, including delivery. So the funding covered delivery as well. So we're still just in the middle of that program, but it's something completely different than we've ever done. We've never purchased product, and we've also never taken on this as like a logistical maze, I would say, to try to figure that all out. But it is a lot of, really nutrient dense product, things like frozen, turkey or chicken that would be, very expensive if the charity or nonprofit had to purchase that. And finally, what I have, alluded to, which is what I work on, which is the foodrescue.ca platform. So it is an online platform that we created that connects businesses that have surplus food with charities or nonprofits or tribal councils that operate a food program of some sort, whether it be, a food bank or a drop-in meal program or after-school program. And it's free for both the business and the charity or nonprofit to sign up. And how it works is that you would just go onto the platform and create an account as a nonprofit or charity, and as a business, you would create an account as well to post those donations. And we just get a bit of information from you, like if you're a charity or nonprofit, you need to provide your, charitable or nonprofit number, just as a means of, having certain steps and conditions on the platform to make sure that, we can follow the food safety and other things that we are wanting to do. And I apologize, this slide, I guess, is not showing up, but it is our dashboard on the homepage. And on that page, you're able to see some certain metrics, which is one of the appeals for both donors and agencies, is that when you claim donations through the platform, the pounds are registered, as well as greenhouse gases that are avoided, because we have a greenhouse gas tracker on the platform. So these are just some different metrics that both parties can kind of track their impact that they're having, and they can use them to, report to maybe donors or their community or even their colleagues within their organization on sort of the impact that they're having. And of course, for the donor, especially corporate donors, they're really interested in corporate social responsibility metrics. And so when they post through the platform, they can track, everything that they're doing. And then the business, when they are posting a donation, they can choose to make a single donation, which is just, I have, 30 pounds of produce, or they can post a recurring donation, which allows businesses to choose, a day of the week that they're going to have that product. So for example, if you're a bakery, you might say every Monday at the end of the day, I know I have products, so I'm going to post every Monday. And then the same agency, if they claim it, would be agreeing to come every Monday. And this is really appealing for agencies and donors, because then that way they know that they get to know each other and they form that relationship. And then the agency knows every week I'm going to get something from this donor. They're really reliable, and I'm, really appreciate that product. And of course, we have different categories on the platform for the business to choose. And that way they can choose multiple categories as well. And this way they can indicate, what they're going to be able to donate. And when you sign up as an agency, you indicate what capacities you have to take food. So for example, maybe you just want to rescue shelf stable because you don't have a fridge or freezer. If that was the case, then when you received notifications through the platform of donations that were available, you would only receive ones that pertain to the information that you provided on your account. This is what goes out to the nonprofits or charities, either via email, text, or on the app. You can receive the notifications as well. And this would just tell them this is a donation that a nearby donor has posted, and you can click to claim that if it fits something that you'd like to use, and then you would be responsible for picking it up. So we just kind of act as the middle person there, and there's no commitment on the platform. So when agencies sign up, it's not like they're saying they're going to do 5 pickups a week or something. They can just read and then make those pickups based on that. And then this is just what it would look like when you see the donation, the information, where's the pickup location, the time that the donor is available to have it picked up, and then what are the items. And then you, as a charity or nonprofit, you review and you think, okay, that's something I can use, or you're like, nope, I'm not interested. If you're not interested, you just leave it. If you are, you click claim, and then that means you're committing to doing that pickup. And I just added a couple of slides at the end, just a little bit about what we can do about food waste. And first of all, Second Harvest offers education and training programs to our charities and nonprofits that are either on our delivery or on our platform. So we cover topics like food literacy, date label training, food waste reduction, and even food safe handling. So we do we have an opportunity right now through our platform that anyone who's registered can get 1 code to do 1 free training online. So this is just different ways that we're able to connect with our agency partners on the platform around, some of the topics that they're most interested in as it connects to food waste. And yeah, this program's really grown in the past couple of years, and we've done over 600 sessions in the past 3 years of different trainings and workshops to our community partners. I want to touch on what our organization would say is the #1 food waste issue that I think on a broad level everyone can engage on, and that would be best before dates. So that's probably something we struggle with, both with donors and agencies on the platform, but also just connecting with the general public, because of course best before dates are created by the manufacturer. So for example, when you see a date on milk like this carton here, that was put on by the manufacturer, and it's an estimate of peak quality or freshness of the product. And it's not actually a food safety indicator, nor is it an expiry date. So, we've worked a lot with public health, both in Toronto and Ontario and other places, to, develop some more resources around this, because there are only 5 items in Canada that have an expiry, and they all connect to items that, have a sort of meal replacement component to them, meaning that should it pass that date, we wouldn't be able to guarantee, the nutritional composition of it. And so that's why the date is so important if somebody's getting that as a meal replacement. So, we worked a lot with public health to create a food donation timetable that we always give to any of our food businesses that are donating on the platform, just to work through, that misinformation around best before dates and what can be donated. And we've also crafted these same resources to go to our charities or nonprofits, as well as the general public, just to really increase that information. Because if an item's been stored correctly, for example, like a tub of yogurt, it can be eaten past the best before date as long as it's, been kept in the correct way. And that's why the safe food handling course and that other information is so important for our charitable partners. And it's one of the things that, is a check and balance that we have within the platform, which is to sort of engage on these topics. And as it connects to best before dates, the take home message is just about, using your eyes and nose to determine if the food is safe, look out for if, a package has been damaged or ripped, and always making sure you're storing food at the correct temperature, as that's what kind of prolongs the life there. And finally, if you know any business or charity that you think would really benefit from the platform, or you think may not know about it and might be interested to know more about it, of course you can always encourage them to sign up on the platform or just reach out to anyone on our team. I help any charities or nonprofits in Ontario, so of course can help, and we also have a food donor coordinator who helps businesses get signed up. And that's all for me.
All right, thank you, Madison. Can you guys hear me all right, or is it garbled? We did have one question come through that was asking about if people had the money they needed to purchase food, would there still be a surplus of food in our system?
Sure, that's a great question, and I don't know if I can, completely answer it, but the first thing I'll say is it's a great point to raise. We as an organization are there to deal with the surplus that currently exists, but of course, we've had many conversations with other like-minded organizations that, a basic income and the right to housing and other things are, a key thing that need to be addressed, and surplus food is not a solution. Like, our platform is not a solution to that at all. It's more of an, for now, solution to the issue of all the surplus food, but it's going to take coordinated intervention to actually address those systemic issues. I would also say that it's kind of a complicated question if we'd have enough food. Yes, but we also overproduce in certain categories. This happens at every part of the supply chain for a variety of reasons, and we do address this in our research project. But if you take the grocery store, for an example, they operate off of a model that you need to have all the shelves filled, and that as a sort of, their belief is that if the customer came in and saw shelves empty, they would go to a different grocery store. So to be competitive, the best example of this is in the bakery section, every day, making sure all times of the day you have everything filled. That's just inherently a wasteful model to that. So there are certain items that we definitely overproduce on. And then, of course, as touched on in the chat, access and income are the other issues that have to be addressed. And we, are just there as a sort of, right now, solution to some of the food waste or some of the surplus food that we have. So I hope I answered that question.
Any other questions for either Thorsten or Madison?
So I got a private question from Jeffrey Fletcher, and he asked, can regenerative farming systems be scaled up? And do you have examples? I think this is the most fundamental and central question to regenerative agriculture. And the answer is A, yes, it can be, but does it really need to? Our goal is growing $100,000 on 1.5 acres right now. Can we grow 10 times that much on 15 acres? Why do we have to? If we can make a living and employ a couple of people over summer on 1.5 acres, why can't we have a second and a third and a fourth farm and replicating methods instead of becoming bigger? And so instead of ask the question, can we scale it up? The question is always, can we replicate it without creating destructive competition? And there my answer would first be yes, we can replicate it without creating competition, but we can also scale it up at landscape level. In the US, they apply regenerative practices like by combining grazing and annual production on 5,000 acres. You can use large ranches where instead of fencing and moving animals day by day, you go back to large herds that roam the land, and so you can graze regeneratively on 200,000 and 1,000,000 acres. And this is being done in the United States, and it works. The big issue there is we need connected land. And if everybody owns like their little parcel, and all those 100-acre lots are dissected from each other, then we would really have to rethink our land use planning. And there's another. Shall I follow up on Lacey? Yep. Okay. So the biggest opportunity to support regenerative agriculture is to stop funding degenerative practices. Right now, the crop insurance system receives just in Ontario, about $100 million of subsidies each year. And in order to do crop insurance, you have to have monocultures, and you have to follow the spray formula given by the seed vendors. And as long as we are subsidizing degenerative agriculture, we don't even have to support regenerative agriculture. We have to stop subsidizing the wrong things. Also, we are subsidizing ethanol production through corn. 40% of all corn in North America goes to ethanol, which is highly subsidized, and it creates very cheap food for feedlots, which is a very destructive and degenerative food production methods. So yes, the biggest opportunity in my hand is by stop promoting degenerative agriculture. And then we can talk about knowledge systems and access to land and building food systems as an alternative.
All right, we're running out of time. We're actually at the point now where people are supposed to be switching between the different sessions if they'd like to. We did get a request to talk a little bit about the Keeping Not-for-Profits Connected during COVID. That's a resource that has been created during the pandemic to connect or to, I guess, kind of recruit different charitable organizations onto a mailing list that is kind of acting as an interim as we're working to get local agencies signed up with food rescue. So I'll share that later on when we send out the links to the different recordings and program material or conference materials.